Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I want to go ahead and continue the conversation on Ohio State. And more specifically, I just kind of want to ask the question that I have seen discussed a lot over the last couple days. Should we care that Ohio State paid a crap ton of money to win a national championship? Okay. So if you're listening to this show, I think you already know the story. But the story is pretty straightforward. The story goes something like this. Ohio State paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million on this roster in NIL. Okay. That, by the way, is not rumor. That's not like a lot of these NIL stories are rumor and speculation. Like, oh, Oregon has unlimited NIL. Well, that's not really verified by anybody. Dan Lanning denies it. Phil Knight denies it. Whatever. Whatever the story is. Carson Beck, is he making $2 million? Is he making $9 million? You ask different people, you get different answers. Well, Ohio State was on the record before the season. Yeah, this is a $20 million roster. That's what it cost to put this roster together. And so, yes, we have the expectation to win a national championship. Well, fast forward, they do win the national championship. And with it, in my opinion, becomes a very interesting question. We know they had one of the highest payrolls in college football. We know that they spent more on this roster than most any school in America can spend. But should we actually care that Ohio State bought a national championship? My answer is, hell no. I do not care. And I'll be honest, I don't think that you should care either, but I don't tell you how you're supposed to feel. So if you want to feel differently, that's perfectly okay. Let's go ahead and dive in, because this is a fascinating question. There's a lot of schools that, I don't know if jealous isn't the right word, but frustrated maybe that they can't spend like Ohio State does. But to me, the question is, again, should you care that your school cannot spend like Ohio State, does not spend like Ohio State, and your school did not win a national championship this year? Okay. So there's a lot of thoughts to it, but let me start with this. Let's work under the assumption that this is a bad thing, that Ohio State spent $20 million on its roster. I don't believe that it is, but let's work under that assumption. Let's pretend, for the sake of argument, that Ohio State spending $20 million is a bad thing. Okay. Well, I bring it up because I think even if that was the conversation, and Ohio State fans, don't worry, I don't believe it's a bad thing, but let's work under the assumption that it was a bad thing, okay? Here's the thing, though. I think there's this belief that Ohio State just went on this, New York Yankees in the 90s type spending spree in the offseason in the portal. They just bought themselves a national championship. While they certainly added key players, I wouldn't deny that Caleb Downs and Will Howard and Quinshaw Judkins played a big role in this national championship. You know where the vast majority of Ohio State's money was spent? Not where you think, not in the portal, but actually in retaining a bunch of players from last year's roster. And so it's kind of interesting, because if you know college football and if you know Ohio State, you know that really Ohio State actually, this national championship started really like the day after the Cotton Bowl last year when they lost to Missouri, and really even before that. Because last year, if you look at last year's junior class that are now seniors, the outside of Marvin Harrison, by the way, I could tell you, I know this for a fact, he wanted to come back to college, but it just got to a point where it's like, it doesn't matter how much NIL we have, he's just risking too much. But outside of Marvin Harrison, there was a group of about like 5-6 guys that were good enough if they decided to go pro to get drafted, but probably weren't first-round guys. Emeka Ibuka, the wide receiver, Travion Henderson, the running back, Denzel Burke, the cornerback, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, maybe a first-round pick, but whatever. Well, I bring it up because all those guys basically decided, you know what? If we're not guaranteed to be first-round picks, let's go ahead and come back to college, and NIL certainly is going to play a role in that decision. Let's make a little bit of money. Let's get paid, but let's come back and try to finish things off the right way. Let's try to win a national championship. Let's try to change our legacy, which up until this point a year ago was good, but not an Ohio State legacy. As we discussed a minute ago, no wins against Michigan, no Big Ten championships, no national championships. So really, if your argument is, Ohio State spent a bunch of money on their roster, well, the vast majority of that money spent was actually to retain really good players off last year's team. And so if you're mad about that, here's my question. Isn't that what NIL was always kind of supposed to be? It was supposed to be for players that had been on campus, that had established themselves as stars, that were guys that maybe weren't pros. Because listen, if you're Marvin Harrison, you got to go pro. In basketball, if you're Cooper Flagg, you got to go pro. But if you're going to be a second-round pick, if in basketball you're not going to get a guaranteed contract, then come back, make some money. Because all I heard for you, they make so much money for the schools and they get none. And so this is what NIL was supposed to be. Players on campus that were really good, that had made money for the school, coming back and making money and getting paid a little bit to play college football. So one, like this idea that Ohio State somehow did something wrong by retaining really good players or something that's sketchy, like I just don't buy it. So one, I just think that's a really stupid way to look at it. But two, I also just think it's stupid to argue, they bought a national championship. It's like, well, one, this is the NIL era, okay? And even if you don't have Ohio State money, you got a lot. Everybody competing at the highest level has a lot of money. Texas has a lot of money. A&M has a lot of money. Whoever, Alabama, I know Greg Burns begging for money, but they got money right now. They might not have Ohio State money, but they're not very far off. And when I look at Ohio State and I look at this narrative, I think, one, everybody has NIL money. But two, the thing that I keep coming back to, you know what I keep coming back to? I keep coming back to this idea of like, well, wait a second now, let's have the conversation. Because even if you have NIL money, you still have to use it right. And you still have to get players to play the right way and to reach their potential, even if they're getting paid. And so you look across college football, college basketball right now, there's a lot of schools that are spending a lot of money on their rosters that are nowhere near national championship caliber like the Ohio State Buckeyes. Let's look at basketball. Who do we believe has one of the highest paid NIL collectives in college basketball? The Arkansas Razorbacks, currently tied for last place in the SEC. They're not spending their money well. They have a lot of money. They ain't buying their way to a national championship, at least not the way they're trending right now. Kansas State in college basketball spent a lot of money on their roster. They're towards the bottom of the Big 12. Indiana spent a lot of money on their roster. They stink. I mean, they're playing better. They beat Ohio State, but the bottom line is they actually beat Ohio State in basketball. But doesn't really matter. They're not really a contender in the Big 10. BYU spent a lot of money on their roster, kind of a middle-of-the-pack Big 12 team. And so to me, my whole thing is that, again, working under the assumption that it's somehow bad that you have a lot of money, the other thing that's worth noting is you still have to spend it right, and you still have to coach guys up once they get to campus. And as a matter of fact, we've seen it a lot in college sports. The teams with the most money are sometimes struggling more than the teams with less, because you got a bunch of guys in that locker room making a bunch of money, and they're just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to show up. I don't want to work out. I don't want to whatever. And so this notion that it's somehow a bad thing, I think it's idiotic. And I was like actually legitimately stunned that this became a topic of conversation. Now, I understand it's been public that Ohio State has a $20 million roster, but the idea that it's somehow this terrible, terrible, terrible thing, could not believe it when I saw it the other day. So Ohio State fans, listen, man. Don't let other schools, don't let other fan bases rain on your parade. Don't let them get you down. This is a special day. You deserve this moment. You deserve to celebrate this. Don't let stupid fan bases get you down, because to me, it's hard for me to say that Ohio State is somehow doing something wrong by spending money. They have the resources. By the way, here's the other thing really quick. Guess what? Everybody has a lot of money these days, but you know what? What's actually really funny is that even in this NIL era, this idea that, you need so much money. Well, guess what? The same teams that are good in the NIL era, and this was something I wasn't sure that I really believed, but the same teams that were good in the NIL era, guess what? They're also the same teams that have been good throughout the history of college football. Guess what? The Final Four this year, it was funny. I was thinking about this. The Final Four this year in college football, Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Texas. In the 12-team playoff era, in the NIL era, guess what? If we had done a Final Four in 1958 or 1988 or 2002 or 2008, that is a very feasible Final Four, and it's no different. As a matter of fact, I went back and looked up 1958. I don't know why I just chose that year. Know who was in the top 10 to start the season? Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Texas. And so the same teams are still good. And so listen, it was just Ohio State's year. And I think the other thing too, a lot of the spending kind of coincided with the fact that you had all these guys coming back. So Travion Henderson and Mekabuka, all these guys are coming back, and you say, well, we got to support them. We got to get the guys around them to take them to that final level, which is where you spend money on Will Howard, which is where you spend money on Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs, etc. I just think it's stupid. I think it's kind of hard to believe that it's somehow a knock on Ohio State. That it's a bad thing that they spent all this money.